Did that sound like it came out of here? I hope so. Okay. So what we're going to be looking at tonight is we're going to start with the Garden of Gethsemane. Now, just out of curiosity, who can tell me if they know what Gethsemane means? That's a very specific word. Okay, what it means is, no, that's Golgotha. Golgotha. Gethsemane means press. It's an olive press. And in that case, you think of Jesus went to the garden where there was a press. It was an olive garden, an active one. And so we have this garden, and it was a beautiful place. So let's just start us down at a little bit. Now you tell me, do we need the lights out to see this better on this side? David, can you knock this bank out for me? This is just one of the roses that was out there. And so I picked it, I took the picture just because it was, oh yeah. These were all over the place. I say all over the place. There was a number of them. There wasn't a lot of vegetation anywhere in Israel, but that was one of the flowers. And what has happened, like with most other places, the Catholic Church went in and they built up a structure. So here's the way it looks. You've got the Garden of Gethsemane, and then next to it, and the reason that it is this church has been built is that if you notice the picture up here, you've got a picture of Jesus at this rock. Well, the Catholic Church thinks from tradition that there's a rock right up in here is the place where Jesus was praying. So they built a church over it. And they do this a lot. So it's a Catholic church. It's called the Church of All Nations because when they built it, a bunch of countries around the world sent money to them. It's the early 1900s. But originally, there was a Byzantine church here. That was in about the fourth, in around the 4th century, it was destroyed. Wars got it. And later on, the Crusaders came around the 1200s. They rebuilt it based again on that rock that's up there. They built it. They deserted it when the Muslims took over in the mid-1300s, which again, it got destroyed. And then it was rebuilt in the early 1900s. So this place is it's an active church, and there was quite a few there, but very beautiful building, but obviously you're not seeing the gospel preached. But this is the spot, and I will say this, they're saying that rock is where Jesus prayed. They don't know. Obviously, they weren't there 2,000 years ago, but its proximity to the garden is literally is part of the garden. So it could have been, but that part's not important. Where it happened is not the important part. Where he prayed, the fact that he was there and he was praying is what's important. Now, the reason I took this picture here, I'm taking this picture from the Garden of Gethsemane. And which gate is this? It's closed up. Which gate was closed? To stop Messiah. There's a tomb, there's a graveyard right here. You remember? Eastern gate. So the eastern gate was closed. This is the gate that Jesus went through. This is the gate when Jesus made his triumphal entry. He went right in. He proclaimed himself as Messiah, and now he's over here in this garden. When I used to read that passage, it sounds like Jesus, he was in the upper room, and then they sung a hymn, they went out, and as they're going out, they go up into this Mount of Olives. And then the people had to come and find him. It makes it sound like they went a distance away. This is it. This is how close he was to that eastern gate. And we're going to see in a moment, this is the east wall. So over here is the south wall. Back in that area is where Caiaphas' house was. So they came and got Jesus right over here from the Temple Mount. And then they walked him through the Kidron Valley right up to Caiaphas' house. It would be no worse than us having to walk from here up to Huck's. It's really, everything's close. So that gives you a frame of where Jesus was. So when the temple police went to get him, they didn't have to go search. They weren't having to scour, like go through all of DuBois County and try to find Jesus. It was not a hard thing to do. So this is just the picture where the temple was, because that's the Dome of the Rock now, but that's where the temple was, versus where Jesus was at this Garden of Gethsemane. So let's go ahead and start at this point with Matthew 26, 30 to 35. Who has that first part? 30 to 35, yes.
It went out and Mount Olive. Then Jesus and them, all you shall be defended because of me this night. For it is written, I will smite the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock and scatter abroad. But after I am written again, I will go before you to tell. The answer said unto him, if all my people defended because of you, yet lying not they defended. He said unto him, verily I say unto thee, this before the cock is crown, and so the 9 is strike. Peter said unto him, though I die with thee, yet all never deny. Likewise, all in fight.
So Jesus, think about what's happening in those verses. He's saying, this is what's going to happen to me tonight. Jesus was not surprised when he's sitting over across from this gate and everybody and the soldiers come. He wasn't surprised when they came to arrest him. He wasn't surprised that Judas came and kissed him. He wasn't surprised with the beating that was about to happen. He knew everything that was happening. And yet in those verses that Joanna just read, he cares and he's concerned about what's going to happen with these people around him who are about to betray him. He knew his own would leave him, and yet he's still concerned about them. He still wants their best. And that was encouraging for me. He knows the sin I'm going to commit, and yet he still loves me, and he still wants my best. He wants me to be conformed to his image, put off my sin, follow him wholeheartedly. He's pulling for me with this. He hasn't left me alone. And we can be encouraged with this. That passage shows us that he was extremely interested, and even with Peter, knowing that he was going to be the one. You remember what it said, and we've talked about this before. He talked about Peter when he was denying the Lord, he swore. And I used to think of that as cursing and saying bad language. He was saying, with God as my witness, I take an oath before God that I don't know this man. May God curse me if I know him. He was calling a curse down on himself from God himself. That was serious. And that's what was happening. And Jesus knew this was going to happen. And yet he's still trying to help Peter. So here are some pictures now, just in the garden, and there's a number that are going to be in here of some videos as well, and I'll try to make sure this volume's right. Some of these trees, and I hope you'll be able to understand what I'm saying here, there's a couple of them that would have been there at the time of Jesus. There's one of these trees they estimate to be 2,300 years old. And that's an old tree. And it's neat too, and I'll share it on here. The way that these trees stay so old is they'll die, but they've got new shoots constantly coming out of them, and those new shoots are constantly bearing olives. And so it's the same tree, but part of it dies, parts of it lives. And our guide was explaining it. That is exactly what the Christian life is like. You have some who die, and you have new shoots that are coming out. That's how Christianity stays alive. It's us passing it on to the next. That's what making disciples is. So that was a good picture for us. So let's look at some of these. Now, one of the things that is very noticeable here, you're going to see pictures of people just kind of sitting around. And that's what this garden is. It's really quiet. It's peaceful, and they don't want you talking. They don't want people walking around cracking jokes. They want it a very serene location, because this is the place where Jesus was praying, where the disciples failed him and didn't stay asleep. This is the place where he went to get alone. So it's a good picture for us. But this is just some of the olive trees that are there. Okay. That I don't know. I'm not getting volume, and I had it a little while ago. It was a sobering place. When you think about that, is where Jesus, sweat as if it were great drops of blood. This is where he was saying, God, if it's possible, let this thing go past me. I don't want to separate from you. And he struggled here. And that's what I meant when I said we saw his humanity at its fullest. Would have been here where he really suffered. And just numbers of people just around praying. There's all those flowers that we were getting pictures of as well. But again, it's a beautiful place. So just another one of these olive trees.
They flood like fire on like tree.
That I don't know. This is how they were when we got there. And I don't know if they have like a bloom season or not. Or if they're just kind of constant. And this is just two people we met, Nate and Amber. He's the one that I told you about. This is just useless information, but he's the one that had just come off of cancer. He had had a lung removed. And so we stayed really close to him when we would walk upstairs and make sure he was all right. But he's recovering and doing well. But and they're the ones who had kids at home. And they were the two of the ones that got COVID while they were over there and had to stay. And they were bummed. So, but they made it home, obviously. But again, that's what we did. Part of what we did while we were there, we took time and just went and we prayed and had time just looking around and thinking on what Jesus had done for us.
Again, you see the old trees, so several of these are a couple thousand years old, but you can see the new growth coming out of it. And this new growth is what's keeping this thing alive. So everything outside is having dead as a life tree. Several of these are 2,000 years old. They've been here at the same time that you have. That's another one. The atmosphere, so to speak. Jesus is here.
You're not understanding something I was saying. They do. That's right. Can you imagine that those trees were there with Jesus? And one of them would have been roughly 300 years old already. I can't fathom that. Well, but it was good to see it. And just some more pictures of just the garden was very tranquil. That's where that church is, right off the edge. So in that sense, you would say like, he brought the 3 disciples to this area, then he went further and prayed by himself, while the others stayed at this other end of the garden. And it's a decent sized place. So that's what was going on. So I just wanted you to be able to see some of these pictures of the trees that were there, and that gives you an idea of the size and everything of what they look like. And again, from where that spot was, you can see up to the gate. There was it was very close where they came to get him, and that's just a panoramic of the whole Temple Mount that's there. So, okay. So that is the Garden of Gethsemane. So while Jesus is in that place, he's agonizing in prayer. He is, I'll use the word concerned, not worried, concerned, but he's not looking forward to going through that separation. I don't think he was physically looking forward to the torture he was going to go through. But the biggest thing that Jesus had to endure was the separation. When he took my sin on him, he was separated from the Father. And that fellowship had been there for all of eternity. And all of a sudden, that closeness is coming to an end. And he knows that's coming. So let's look at another passage. It's going to be 2 of you, I think, verses 36 to 46. I think I split that one in 2.
My soul is a little further. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as I will. He gave us to his house, he said, what he shall not watch with me.
41 to 46. Matthew 26, 41 to 46. Okay.
Watch and pray that ye not into temptation, spirit and be willing, but that the flesh. He went away again the second time and prayed, saying, "Oh, my Father, if this cup may not pass away from me, except I drink it, thy will be done." He came and found them and spoke again, for their eyes were heavy, and he left them and went away. The 3rd time saying the same word. Then Caiaphas to his disciples and said to them, "Sleep on now, take your rest, behold, the hour is at hand. It's great. Rise, let us be going, behold, he is at hand, that good."
This is another example where we see Jesus, even though he's going through this extremely difficult time, even though he's, again, that sweating great drops, as it were, of blood, this man is hurting, and he's coming back, and he's not doing what I would probably do. I would be looking at these disciples and saying, "What is wrong with you guys? Get up." And I would be wanting to chide them. He's gentle with them. Even at the end, "Take your sleep, guys. It's done. It's done." And he was gentle with these disciples. And what it shows me is, even though he knew what they were doing, he knew what was about to happen, he knew they were going to leave him, he knew their unfaithfulness, Jesus here is showing this unselfish love. And that's what he does for us. And that's the picture for us that we're supposed to do. And I appreciate how he shows this. So at this point, what happens is he's told them, this is what, I'm praying. It's not, he knows he has to go through with this. The people come in this next verse, in verse 47, they come, they arrest him, Judas betrays him. Judas leads, he takes men from the Sanhedrin, from the high priest, he brings them to arrest Jesus. The disciples do exactly what Jesus said they would do. They flee. This is also the passage, not here, where Peter chops off the servant's ear. Jesus, in his sympathy, in his compassion, picks the thing up and heals the man. And they still arrest. I don't understand that one. To see that man healed and still arrest him, that was brutal. But he showed how loving he was. And now, that's really verses 47 to 56. He is brought at that point. They arrest him on this side of the gate, and they take him up here to Caiaphas' house. So let's go ahead and then we're going to be talking about the house a little bit more, but let's go ahead and read verses 57 to 68. I think that's again two of you. 57. Is that what you have?
557 to 63.
Okay, you read those.
And they that laid hold on Jesus, led him away to Caiaphas the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were assembled. But Peter followed him afar off unto the high priest's palace, and went in and sat with his servants to the end. Now the chief priests and elders and all the councils sought a false witness against Jesus to put him to death, but found none. Yet though many false witnesses came, yet found they none. At the last came two false witnesses, and said, This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and build it in 3 days. And the high priest arose and said unto him, Answerest thou nothing? What is it which these witnesses witness against you? So Jesus held his peace, and the high priest answered and said unto him, I adjure thee by the living God, that thou tell us whether thou be the Christ, the Son of God.
And the high priest spoke, saying, think that the prince said he's guilty of death. Then he put his spit in his face. Prophesy unto us that Christ should receive this.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you now to interpret some scripture for me. Okay. Verse number 67. If you had to describe that scene, how would you describe some of these words to me? Let me put it this way. How would you describe the tense of these words? Yes. Okay, so here's what didn't happen. Jesus is not standing there and somebody goes and spits at him. And another goes and slaps him. And another shoves him. And it's all over. That's not the tense of these words. It's like they had a lineup just waiting to pummel Jesus. This point right here is really where we see, and I don't think that the torture would have started here. Remember last week, we looked at that road that they led him up, and we saw the path that Jesus walked coming through the Kidron Valley up to the house of Caiaphas. And I said, this is what we're going to be looking at next week. Up that path, it was just a rock path. Don't get the impression, these were Jews that were arresting him. Don't get the impression they led him kindly up this road. They hated him. It would have been more like as you're walking up this road, hurry up, shoving down, knocking down. They were being brutal to Jesus. And now we see in verse 67, they spit on him repeatedly. That's shameful. That is enough to make somebody, I mean, that would make you angry. Jesus got spit on, could do absolutely, chose not to do anything about it. That's exactly right. He gave it to them. That's a very good point. They buffeted him. What is buffet? They beat him up bad. Others smote him with the palms of their hands. They were beating on Jesus. That's what Jesus, as he is arrested, That's what he's going through. As he went up to this place, now this is not obviously the building. This is built on top of, you remember we've talked about that, where things are underneath. And we're going to see some of what was underneath, because that's there, the caves are there. And they built this structure, which is a new structure, on top of these things, on top of this dungeon. And if you remember, this is where they kept him until the next morning. He's there imprisoned and getting beaten until the next morning when he would go get tried. Now, that's not all that happened here. As we think about what happened at Caiaphas's house, can you give me any other incidences that are famous that happened here at Caiaphas's house? And a couple of them happen right now at the same time frame. Judas has already betrayed him, and he's done. I'll tell you, you can't see it very well, but right here it says, this is called the holy place, the Church of St. Peter. Why would it be named after St. Peter? What did Peter do here? He denied it. This is the spot where Peter would have followed him up that path that we looked at last time. Peter followed him up that path, and he went, it says he went into the place. Okay, let's look at what he went into. That'll show us a lot. Okay, this is a picture, and I've tried to get perspective. You see right there, that's the Temple Mount. Right here is the Mount of Olives. So over across this Temple Mount is where he was, and they marched him through the Kidron Valley and up. There's the path right over here. They marched him up this path to Caiaphas's house. So there's you can see the distance that he had to walk. This is outside of Peter's place. Okay, this area right in here and down here, this was they think the original floor from the Byzantine church that would have been in the 4th century. So 400 years after the time of Christ, this church was already built. And what they found down here is right up here. This mosaic was still on the floor. So they pulled it up and put it on the wall just to kind of try to save it. That's the mosaic, a partial they found. So it was a good find. And that's how they know that some of this area is legit. Now, what would happen, and this is some of the underground caves, what they would do in caves. You remember when we looked at Jesus' birth, and we talked about they would keep animals under the houses in the caves. This is what they would keep them in. So they would keep the animals down in places like this. Well, for the high priest, they also imprisoned people. We're not going to go there tonight, but if you go to Acts 5, that's also where Peter was imprisoned when he was found guilty. And that's the classic where Peter said, or Peter and John, I believe it was, we ought to obey God rather than man. They told him to stop preaching, and they beat them. They scourged them. This is probably the same place. He went back to the leader's house. Everything's happening close in time. This is where the leader was. This is probably the same place where that happened. So it's hard to get all this in a picture. You'll see a video in a second. These are the caves. You see these stairs here, obviously really new. These are 2 openings that have stairs that you'll see in a minute that go down. It was a cistern. It was a water cistern used as a dungeon. This is most likely where Jesus was thrown. When he was after they beat him, and he had to stay until morning to go before Pilate. That's the spot where Jesus would have been thrown in and kept there and maybe beaten more. I don't know, but this is an idea of what it was like when he was in there.
Did you have the waterway blocked off for down here?
There was definitely no water in there. So how they did it or what's changed, I'm not sure. So you can see our group that was down there, went around and down in those stairs.
there again later. Backside, back.
So you can see that where they've hewed it out, everything is in this granite bedrock. They hewed it out, made this, it ended up being a dungeon. And that's where Jesus would have been thrown. And it's okay, this guy, that's Nate, he's probably my height. You got to about right here, and that's where the openings come. So you got about a 10-foot drop. Now, you could do a 10-foot jump. I've done 10-foot drops just when I was little, just jump off a treehouse, whatever. It was fun. Okay, this is throwing off into rock after you've been beaten, spit on. This was not something that just going into this thing would have been torturous. And that's what's happening here. These are just others of the different rocks. I don't remember what that is, but I left it. So these are just some of I had said in that video that Peter had gone in and denied the Lord. We're told that he went in. This is the area that he would have gone into. This is where all of the riffraff, if you will, was there guarding Jesus, going through all of the torturing. This is where everybody was hanging out. This would have been warmer for them. This would have been the kind of area that Jesus would have gone into. Some will say he was just in the courtyard, they don't have that anymore. They made a courtyard, a new one that's up on the outside, but we're told Peter went in. So my guess, this is very close to what he was gone into. He went into the caves where the guards would have been watching Jesus.
I heard like something about how he followed him from afar.
Yes. And then he was away from him, and then Jesus was in doing his thing, and then Peter went in. And that's where he was confronted. This is just, and it's hard to see this too, a glassed off area where they found these caves. And I think these were discovered late 1800s. And so they're still doing work on those. But when they found the things from the Byzantine era, that helped them realize this was the spot where Caiaphas' house was. So and we're going to see this again in a second, but you can see where these stairs, this is just a drawing. The stairs are coming down to this pit. That's the area where Steve was about to read a minute ago. So that's the area that we were looking at. And I think I've got, let's go back. I want to show you that. Okay, yeah, this is about as best we're going to get. You see the steps coming right here? That's going down into the pit. So this would have been the type of thing where they would have thrown him, take him down these stairs and then push. So this is what Jesus went through for us. That's right. And that's why I was bringing up, you can do a 10-foot drop. You can jump 10 foot and not break things. And when that happens, I'm sure though that would have done scraping and tearing, and it would have been an ugly thing, but it wouldn't have necessarily have broken the bones. We know it didn't break his. And then this is just on the outside. This outside, right adjacent to the house, this is a working mill. From its day, this would have been where the millstone was. There was granary bins. There was a place where they were finding tools for the mill. And it would have been right next to Caiaphas' house. And that's what these drawings are showing, where all these pieces were. And that was down closer, so you could see what the mill area was like. But this is what, going back to Caiaphas' house, he was kept there until morning. They beat on him. We don't know how long. We know it kept on going. But this is the area where they would keep prisoners, they would keep livestock. But the biggest thing for us is this is the place where Jesus' torture and his agony really started. This is where his passion would have been getting in full swing. And all of this, Jesus did for us. And that was challenging for me, to see this place where he allowed himself to be tortured, to go through all of these injustices, knowing that he could easily get himself out of it. But he loved us, and he chose not to. So, you have now seen Garden of Gethsemane, and you've seen Caiaphas' house where it all started. Next week, we'll be looking at, not next week, the week after, the place of the cross. There's a couple of different options there, but place of the cross is what we'll be looking at next time. So, questions about here are some truths we can learn. I've got several we can pull out of this. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. My nose was like leather. It was horrible. 105, 106 normal. Oh, yes. Now in those caves, it would have almost been, when you go under like that, you could probably gotten chilled and be getting sick. You could be getting damp and nasty in those caves, which that goes back to where I keep thinking of so Bethany, I keep thinking about this when we talk about the shepherds this time of year, seeing those caves that the shepherds would have had their animals in. They were cool. There was a constant cooling effect in there. This would have been pretty cold, probably 50s. What are some truths we can take away from these? Remember what Peter said at the beginning? And I'm going to paraphrase. Well, you paraphrase. What did Peter say? Jesus said, "You are going to deny me. You people are going to forsake me." What did Peter say? Not me. That's right. Did Peter follow through? What did Peter do? Not 3 different times. And you remember the one, I'm paraphrasing. With God as my witness, may God curse me if I'm lying. I don't know him. May God curse me if that's not the truth. He was calling down a curse and anathema from God on himself. I've heard people say these words. I remember a pastor said this in a message. I'd never do that. Oh, yeah. It was very quick, which makes it even worse, doesn't it? If it's a year from now, you can almost see, okay, well, I didn't even think about it. He knew. He should have known. But that statement that this guy made, I'd never do that. I'd never deny my Lord like that, do we? Do we deny Jesus even today? There's a lot of ways we can deny. What's a way that we can deny Jesus today? What do we do? We can deny him by keeping our mouth shut. Absolutely. Sometimes it's just going along with the flow. Everybody thinks you're just like them and they like you and everything's all right. It's not all right. We know when we have opportunity, and that doesn't mean go out on the street and start yelling at people. But we know when we have opportunities to stand and to say something for Jesus. We need to be careful that we're not denying him. I think one of the places I've seen it has been in the work, not here, but in the workplace, where you've got guys, and I heard these words one time. Somebody said, when I'm working in the factory, I use factory talk. And I just got to shake my head, you know. And this is a person who claimed to be a believer. Saying, no, you don't use factory talk. You use Jesus talk there too. You want to talk about Jesus, have a testimony. But they use factory talk so they fit in. That's denying Jesus. And it's a sad thing. I also appreciate it. As Jesus was going into this the storm of his eternity, as he was going into this really rough, humanly speaking, rough time, he was focused on the needs of others. He was focused on their best, what they needed, and that was a good example for me. So many times I've seen people who, it's like, I remember seeing one, and I'll just leave it at that. Seeing somebody I knew, there was a death happening. It was an extremely rough time in their life, and they were trying to encourage other people. It was not, they were grieving, and there was no doubting that they were grieving. It was obvious, but they wanted other people encouraged. They weren't dragging them down and giving them, a woe is me. Jesus is in control of this. This is good. Even though they were hurting. Jesus cared about his own. It's a good example. And if Jesus saw the need, you remember here. Oh, there we go. If Jesus saw the need to get into a place like that and get alone with God, get alone with his Father, if he saw the need to pray and ask for strength, this is God in the flesh. He was God. Yet he saw the need in his humanity to get alone with his Father. Get the power of the Holy Spirit. He knew he needed this. If he saw the need to do that, how much more do I need to take that more seriously? To be willing to get alone with God. And Jesus asked, which floors me, he asked the three especially, Peter, James, John, you guys pray for me. Pray for me. This is a hard time. Pray for me. If Jesus needed intercessory prayer, how much more do we need? We need people praying for us. We need to be willing to say, would you please pray for me through this? I'm struggling right now. Jesus asks for it. How much more do we need to do? So those are the three that I have. Any other questions, comments? Yes, yes, good point. And isn't it encouraging that Jesus welcomed him back? Even when he did such a horrendous thing, Jesus welcomed him. Go tell the disciples, hey, Peter too. Peter, get Peter. And he pointed it out. And then he met him. Remember the place we looked at when he went back up to Sea of Galilee? And he restored Peter. Even after that horrendous sin. It's a good point. Okay, well, I hope that was challenging and eye-opening a little bit. It shows at least where he was and what he went through. So let's go ahead and close in prayer, and then we'll be dismissed.